Well, hello and welcome to Mark and Carrie. We're back in your basement, which is like the second time we're here.
Exactly. Or at least that's what we're telling everyone else.
That's true. I think I know the answer to this, but are you boycotting watching the World Cup, or are you watching? Where are you on this?
So I did an interview with a student newspaper about this and found myself getting to a pretty interesting place in the conversation, which was the best way to boycott this thing is to watch it.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Which is, what you're watching is an example of sports washing, right? So you've heard of greenwashing, right? So it's sports washing, right? And the best thing you can do, rather than like, I'm above this and I'll ignore it, right? Because it will continue regardless, is to watch it. And if it's truly ridiculous, and if it's AstroTurf fans, and if it's just nonsense, then in a sense, you're part of showing it up.
Yeah.
Right? Unfortunately for that thesis, it seems that it's actually quite a well-run World Cup with genuine fans from around the world that seem to be enjoying themselves. So yes, it does put the moral thing sort of, into question in a new way. So in other words, yes, I'm watching it. There you go. I
am an American fan with typical American preferences in that nothing ever seems to happen in soccer. And so I'm LA, so I'll watch it, but I feel like nothing happens. And then when it does, like that's the only thing that happens for a long time.
There's an amazing Simpsons episode from years and years ago when Pele was still around. And Pele shows up in Springfield and takes a big bag of cash. Yeah. And then a whole bunch of people pass the ball from side to side and nothing happens. And Homer says something like, really? This is soccer? And yes, sometimes it can be like that. It's kind of a tragedy that the most watched game was the USA-England game, which was the worst game of soccer that I've seen in about 10 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was totally crap. But today actually was quite interesting.
Well, I actually watched the USA-England game and I was like, wow, I thought the US was going to get totally hammered because, England's got to be way better than the US.
We could get into this, but the minute Gareth Southgate, the England manager, decides to play three at the back, they become completely immobile. Okay. And it's almost as if the Americans couldn't believe how immobile they were. That was the only reason they didn't score. But anyway, let's move on from that then. Let's think about the other stuff that's going on. There's no beer in the stadiums, which is a fun one.
Well, they did that at the last second too. The brother of the emir said he didn't like the Budweiser tents.
Yes, exactly.
And was like, no more.
I mean, I'm with him on that one because I don't actually think Budweiser is actually beer.
Well,
so, it is. It's banning Bud, and I'm all in favor of that one. Yeah. There was the whole thing of you got an instant yellow card if you wore LGBTQ rights armbands.
Yes.
Which was pretty heavy tactics.
But what are your thoughts about this in terms of... this gets into a whole nother thing about, sports and the politicization of sport. But there is for all the human rights abuses, there is what's the punishment for Qatar? I mean... Well,
none. Yeah, totally.
The world is there. It seems well run. The fans seem excited.
Well, there's an interesting one as well. I mean, we tend to think about human rights abuses as someone is taken to prison and tortured, right? Yeah. That's not what's happening. What the human rights abuses are loads and loads of voluntary migrant workers from poor countries working in appalling labor conditions and being seriously injured, maimed, or being killed. Right. So are those rights abuses or are they just terrible labor practices? Right. There's a lot of things getting thrown into the blender on this one. In terms of, what Qatar gets out of this, you got to think of that whole region. Think of Manchester City, the biggest club in England. Right. They're owned by the mob out of Abu Dhabi, the neighbors. Right. All of the airlines, Qatar, Etihad, Emirates. Right. They're all sponsors of like big football teams. Right. Qatar has at various points owned, I think, or had done sponsorship deals, I should say, with Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Roma. They recently bought PSG, Paris Saint-Germain. So this is all part of a sort of giant, if you will, sports washing, image branding, honestly, where the nice authoritarians, look, we buy football. Now, why would you do this? Partly it's ingratiating yourself to the Western states that buy your oil and are your security guarantors. But there's also a lot of stuff which goes on, under the radar that's very similar at home. If you think about, elite universities opening up campuses in Doha and all this sort of stuff. If you think about elite American medical institutions having separate wings from people for the Gulf and building ancillary clinics over there. I mean, we're standing over here throwing our righteousness stones at them. But, we do the same sort of stuff. We're total enablers of this whole thing.
So Qatar is not the only country to import laborers. Of course, the United States has a long history with this as well. And of course, lots of other Western nations too. But I didn't realize that the laborers often, I don't know in how many cases their passports were taken away and they were not allowed to leave. So
right. And that's the rights violation.
Yeah.
But that's incredibly common. Right, not just in the Gulf. I mean, stories of like Filipinos who leave the Philippines and become domestic servants in India and places in South Asia, like the removal of the passport to keep you there, and then this sort of stuff. That's common. That even happens, with certain elite families in England. There's been court cases over this, so that's kind of a general sort of thing.
So it's interesting to think about the elevation of these particular royal rich families from the Middle East, like buying their way into certain circles that allows them to then be accepted, outside of the terrible human rights abuses.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is, as they say, sports washing. In case anyone's listening and hearing the background growling and something squeaking, that's the golden retriever saying, "Can you pay attention to me, please? Because I'm a cute golden retriever." But we will keep this in the episode. And Lucy, calm down.
It makes it so much more friendly and less serious.
Exactly. All right, so let's switch it. You must have been super excited. Finally, after months and months of talking about it, the midterms are here. And it was amazing, right? Everything changed.
Deep breath. I have, how long is this episode going to be? It was funny because, of course, in the notes, it was, should we talk about the midterms? I was like, yeah, there's everything to talk about the midterms. I think my big takeaways, I have 3 takeaways for the midterms. And one is that polling is dead. And we've talked about that. Like the Republicans flooded the last couple of weeks with all these garbage polls. But polling essentially didn't really tell us anything, which is what led to the red wave which should have been, many people thought it was going to be a red wave, but then was red trickle, red drizzle. So polling is dead. These are not particularly novel thoughts, but we are very, very close.
But the polling thing is interesting, right? Because isn't it meant to be sort of, they called it in Britain the silent Tories, right? And it's the silent Republicans. So the whole thing was you were underestimating the Republican vote.
Yeah.
So the reason they thought there was going to be a wave is because they already had a majority, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't just that they got it wrong, they got the sign wrong. I mean, it was basically the other way around, right?
Yeah.
So polling's really in trouble, right?
Oh, I think so. I mean, just the entire basis of how do you get a random sample these days, I think is incredibly hard. And the amount of money that has to be spent in order to actually get that. And then to just be able to, in everything, to be able to tell the good poll from the bad poll. And how do we actually know the difference between that and junk science, the junk statistical science versus the stuff that actually can stand up. And I think the other thing that was interesting is that we're very closely divided. Power flips as quickly as it does from every 2 years or so. Is I think one thing that adds to this, the U.S. can't get anything done because the power is switching back and forth all the time. Yeah.
Years and years ago, it's kind of funny that when I reflect on it, back in 1994, there's a political scientist and an economist did a book together, and it was this whole theory of rational ticket splitting. Right?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So this idea that basically, the publics have rational expectations and are long-sighted and have all this information, which is complete nonsense. And that somehow what they were doing was basically making sure there was divided government because they liked that, because that then gave them stability and all the rest of it. And what a load of rubbish. I mean, people don't know anything, right? It's just, we know now with the spread of social media, it's just chaos out there, chaos and conspiracy theories. And it's just partisan throwing red meat or blue meat to the base and hope for the best. With maybe 1 or 2 wedge issues that kind of get you a little something. Like if you're in Alaska, but you're okay with fish, you can win if you're a Democrat, right? If you're Joe Manchin, right, you can be absolutely conservative, but you can support the Inflation Reduction Act, even though that's on the Democrats' side, so long as you're, doing the other stuff.
Yeah. I think it's interesting on that. I mean, people showed up in Georgia and they voted for Brian Kemp for governor, the Republican, but then voted for Warnock, the Democratic senator. And this happened in Pennsylvania as well, that they would vote for the state ledge person. They'd vote for John Fetterman, the Democrat. So, I mean, you actually saw moments of ticket splitting, which political science didn't think happened anymore.
Right. That's a good, exactly.
Just straight ticket
it was
voters.
as I was saying, it it was true when they wrote about it, then it stopped
Yes.
being true.
Yeah.
And that was a load of rubbish. And then like it seems as if it's come back to a certain extent, at least in some places.
They're still counting votes in 2 House districts. So the House has not been fully decided. Yes.
I mean, who sent the votes around? The British Post Office? I mean...
Yeah, California, and then Colorado 3, which is Lauren Boebert. She's known as Mega Barbie. So these votes are still being counted. But as it stands right now, it's, I think, 220 something to 218. But the Republicans are expected to pick up those 2 seats. So in the end, it'll be plus Republicans 10 seats, I think, in the House. They were predicting something like 60. So it's still a pretty narrow margin for them.
So should the Democrats be confident going forward? Let's assume the following, right? China doesn't invade Taiwan.
Okay.
Russia doesn't go nuclear. And we're all still here. Inflation abates. The economy gets better.
Yeah.
Are they actually in a re-electable position?
So is Trump on the ballot? I think that's what is really the question for the presidential.
So let's turn to it. He's back. He's officially back, right?
He's back, yeah.
But he was invited back on Twitter. He hasn't gone back.
No. And I'm curious, do you think, I've been reading, he has a contract, which I don't know if he's ever paid attention to any contract, but a contract with Truth Social. So this is maybe why he's not back on Twitter?
Maybe. I mean, I'm sure he could unwrite that contract if he wanted to.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
But then there's the whole sort of like, maybe it's just liberal reporting bias, but it seems the Republicans aren't that thrilled. In part because of the effect that he had in the midterms, right?
Well, and it's so interesting. Murdoch, the New York Post is what he owns, right?
Oh, no, he owns everything.
Yeah.
Come on, yeah.
Well, that's true. The first 2 covers right after the midterm were the future, big picture of Ron DeSantis, and then Trumpity Dumpity. So you could tell that the Murdochs are like, we're done with you.
We're done with you, exactly. Which actually tells you where real power lies.
Yes, exactly.
It is not with your electable representatives. It is with who your media barons want to give them a tax break for the next several years.
Yes. But is he on the ballot? And of course, however many days after the midterm, he said, yes, he's going to be. But I mean, he's also done even for him, some pretty nutty stuff.
I mean, the white supremacist and Ye dinner, it's hard to know which one is which in that statement. Yeah. That was good. I heard that variously described as, what was the one that you heard?
What was it? It was a take on, Trump is back, Dein Kampf.
That was good. That was pretty good.
I mean,
the other one I liked was he didn't know he was dealing with a white supremacist because of the white hoodie he had on.
You can't.
I know, you can't make it up.
No,
you really can't make it up. So anyway, he's back. It seems to be less of the tsunami and red storm than people had thought. The Democrats still seem to be alive. The world continues to surprise.
And just one last thing about Trump. So his endorsements were mixed. He had, I think, 10. If you think of the actual endorsements, it's hard to measure this stuff because sometimes he said yes and then he'd pull it back. But he had 10 victories, 10 defeats. Some big defeats like Dr. Oz, for example, in Pennsylvania.
But in all seriousness, he was a total muppet.
Yeah, Dr. Oz.
He was ridiculous.
Yes. So I don't know that necessarily gives us any real evidence as to, how much, whether Trump has the juice to stay for another 2 years. But he's still front page news. He's the best thing Democrats have going for him too. Especially if Biden, who just had his 80th birthday, runs. I know.
And the whole thing is, of course, with Biden that, he will run if Trump runs because, if Trump has the only I can fix it complex, then Biden has the only I can defeat Trump complex.
Yep.
And it's bad enough with 2 septuagenarians going at it. A near octogenarian and an actual octogenarian.
Yes.
Oh my God. I know. Really, we need to move on. We really do.
Yeah. It almost makes you want Ron DeSantis to win. Somebody
who's actually not seen MASH when it was originally syndicated, right?
Yes.
That would be good. That would be good. All right, where else do we want to go? China.
Well, and
as Trump would say, China.
Yes. The protests there, if we can call them protests, are interesting because you wonder how long Xi is going to allow these to happen before is he just letting them have their moment? Or presumably he's going to have the secret police shut this stuff down pretty quickly.
Well, remember, this is a guy who in the space of 3 years built the equivalent of the American prison industrial complex.
Jeez.
And put an entire ethnic group into it who number in the millions.
Yeah.
So, the notion that he's going to be a little bit afraid of a couple of protests in town, that's not going to happen. So, I mean, interesting stuff there. Apparently, it was exacerbated by Chinese football fans actually watching the World Cup and seeing all these people who didn't have masks.
Yeah.
And then it was the apartment fire, and then basically the frustrations and it just kicked off.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole sort of, we're going to go for zero COVID. It sounds good, but if you actually say to people, here's what we're going to do, we're never going to stop having lockdowns.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's where it gets kind of like, what? Why are we actually doing this?
Yeah.
And rather than sort of signaling the competence of the Communist Party, which is what they always trump, it is, in the other sense of Trump, it is this, just sort of like, you people have no idea what you're doing. You blew the vaccine.
Yeah.
You came out with Sinovac. It doesn't work very well. You won't ask the West for like their stuff. So now you've got this situation where you're just constantly locking down entire cities. What? It's not really working.
Well, and your citizens they're actually humans and don't want to be locked up anymore. So much so that they're risking their lives to protest. I have a sidebar question for you. So China has a huge population. India has a huge, but neither of them are in the World Cup. Do they not? I mean, they can build gigantic cities, but they can't.
So it's interesting. I think Modi was also a bit of a soccer fan, but I know that Xi definitely was.
Yeah.
And China has a sort of like Chinese Super League. And for a few years before the pandemic, they were offering big salaries to Western players. They were really trying to build this up. But I don't know if it's kind of fallen by the wayside. The COVID restrictions have done it or whatever, but it just hasn't happened for either. I mean, for India, one of the big sports, of course, is cricket.
Yeah,
coming out of that kind of post-colonial legacy, if you want to put it. Sports in China, I mean, there's huge following for British sports teams. Manchester United have enormous fan base in China, this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The TV rights in China are incredibly lucrative.
Wow.
So it's really popular.
Yeah.
And there is a domestic league, but maybe it's just a bit like the Americans. I mean, it just took them 20 years to get it together and actually be good.
Yeah.
That's it. Maybe it just takes that bit of time. One thing we should mention, though, and we actually got an email about this.
Yeah.
We do read your emails from a friend in Iran who basically said, why are you guys not even mentioning the fact that we've got, more serious protests? And I think we do need to acknowledge this because it's one of those things that the West loves to highlight because it doesn't like Iran. And then, it points at, the heroicness. Well, first of all, the situation that's coming from basically killing like women, or, teenage women, right? By the security apparatus. And then the protests against this. And, you see the way that this bubbled into the World Cup. And you have the Iranian team basically doing their team photograph with everybody covering their mouth, right? As if to say we're all being silenced, right? And, this is a regime that doesn't screw around, right? Once they decide you need to go, they will kill you, right? It's not like China will throw you in jail for a few years, right? They will actually kill you. So I actually thought it was incredibly impressive that the Iranian team would even make a gesture like that. I mean, that was incredibly brave. And, what happens then is you start to get these idiot questions from sports journalists about, well, what do you think about, freedom and all this sort of nonsense? And, you're asking these players who have already put themselves in jeopardy just by showing the slightest signal and sympathy for this stuff. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
No, but I agree with you because even with all the, I'm going to wear the armband for LGBTQ, right? And then they didn't. And the Iranians the penalty is death. They were the bravest, to my mind.
No, absolutely.
To actually stand up. I also, there are all sorts of different numbers in terms of how many people have been killed in terms of the protests. But there's also a report, I think early in September, that the Ayatollah, who's in his actually similar age to Joe Biden, is actually quite...
Thank you, 80-year-olds.
Was quite ill. So I don't know. Just knowing Iranian politics from very far away distance, does this signal a change in leadership? Or is this just one of those things that the West is really, look at these protests, somewhere else in China and Iran, and maybe we look somewhat better in comparison.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where our at various points we think our own regimes are unpopular. Yeah, look no further than Liz Truss.
Yeah.
But you can say a lot of things about Liz Truss, but she wasn't basically out to murder her own citizens en masse. Yeah. And you really are dealing with an entirely different type of regime where it's deeply distrusted, if not hated, by large segments of its own population. Yeah. And they know that, and they will fight back. Yep. Because they know that if they're ever vulnerable and replaced, then there's going to be payback for all the stuff that they've done.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't screw around. Okay, are we going to talk about FTX?
Go on.
I've been waiting to hear I'm so curious what your take on this is. Sam,
we've spoken crypto before,
yes.
And I've been, shall we put, a bit of a skeptic, right? This one's actually much more interesting as what happens when traditional banking meets crypto, or crypto tries to do traditional banking, right? So how do you make money off of a worthless token that's only got value because other people think it has value?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're going to have a place you can buy and sell different tokens, and you can actually make prices, right?
Yeah.
So you have this thing called an exchange, right? Now, why would you put your coins in the exchange rather than like keep them on your computer and trade them yourself? Well, because of ease, liquidity, options, you can do things. Okay, that's making sense. I'm willing to pay you fees. But to really make it worthwhile, the exchanges basically said, if you give us your tokens, we'll do investments in other tokens and we'll guarantee you a pretty high rate of return for doing so.
And this is what FTX is saying.
Yes.
Sam Bankman-Fried.
All these exchanges,
okay.
basically. They're not just exchanges that charge you a fee because it's convenient for you to buy and sell stuff. They're actually giving you a quote-unquote value proposition, which is I'll give you X% on, a return if you give us your coins. Now, for that to happen, they have to go off and make really risky investments.
Okay.
And so long as they pay off, everything works. But now you've got the classic Ponzi, right? So long as the money's flowing in, it's all good. The minute the money drops, it's bad.
Yeah.
And what happened was, it seems that basically to cover up the losses that they were making, he gave the hedge fund that he runs, it's called Alameda Research, loads of people's coins to then sort of gamble on resurrection for the losses they'd already made.
Okay.
And of course, the whole thing just went down. This is a classic story. This is like AIG in the financial crisis, being over-levered on insurance contracts, and then basically banks, what they call gambling on resurrection, the all or nothing bet to bring it back, right? So it's kind of funny that to me, what I think is really interesting is, despite the fact that it's all DeFi and it's all about crypto and it's all these exchanges and it's so new and all that, it's actually a really old story.
Yeah.
There's nothing really that new in it. You got massively over-levered.
Yeah.
You took a series of bets, you gambled on resurrection, and down you went. That's an incredibly old story.
So I gave you my money, and then I wanted it back because I got nervous and there was no money.
There was no money because I'd borrowed it from you on the prior that I'm going to give you money back for doing so. I'm going to pay you an interest charge, essentially, right? But what's actually happened is it's not really there because I took it all and gambled it away on something else.
Right.
And then I got found out.
Right. And because it's like crypto bros, they're like, no regulation, you can't regulate us.
Right. So there's, at least when AIG went down, there was the insurance regulator of Pennsylvania who was backed up by the US government, right? So you could do something about that.
Yeah.
In this case, no. There's to a certain extent, there's a certain poetic justice about this, right? So if one of your main claims is like, no government, no regulation, it's the real value, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, that's what happens when it turns out, you've invested in crap. Nobody comes to help you.
Will he... Okay, so here's where I'm going. So Elizabeth Holmes was just sentenced.
There's a news point, right?
For 11 years.
I wonder how she's enjoying Club Fed.
Yes.
I wonder where they sent her.
The WeWork guy, where Adam, he didn't go to jail.
No, because he didn't actually do any fraud.
Didn't he?
He was just an appalling ass.
Well, Sam... I mean, what I thought was so interesting is, first of all, he wears these gigantic, he has, and he's like this wonder kid or kind or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And he's like, everyone's like, MIT, his parents are Stanford law professor. And there's this weird like, oh, well, therefore it must be okay.
No, and it's the Elizabeth Holmes thing. So, I mean, you're totally right? She's Stanford. She wears a polo neck. She looks like a female Steve Jobs. She's kind of cute. She must be a genius.
So here's my question does Elizabeth Holmes get taken, or does she get sentenced to 11 years? Will Sam Bankman-Fried, will he suffer any penalties?
That's a fascinating one, right? So somebody I had on the other podcast I did a while ago is a guy called Dan Davies who wrote a book called Lying for Money. Okay. Right. So if you haven't listened to it, listen to it. It's great because he's an authority on this. He used to work for the Bank of England. Okay. And it's basically about financial fraud. And the difference between financial fraud and fraud in any other sphere is fraud in any other sphere tends to be based upon a lie. Okay. And if you can show the lie, then you've committed fraud, right? Okay. But maybe it just didn't work out. Now, you can't do that with Theranos technology because there was no technology. It was bullshit. You can just go, this doesn't work, right?
Right.
But
she said it did.
Right.
Okay, so there's a fraud.
And then she consistently said it did when it was clear that it didn't, right?
Okay.
That's a fraud. Now, Dan's point is that pretty much anyone in any business, like you don't have to be doing a crypto bro thing. You could be running a bakery, right? It's really hard to tell the difference between bad luck, mismanagement, and a fraud.
I see.
The very first time it happens. If you got a track record, you run 3 bakeries, they all go bust, people get suspicious, right?
Yeah.
But if I did one and I bought too many shares and I opened at the wrong time and it just ended up sort of all falling apart and I couldn't do it and I default on the loans and I go into bankruptcy, maybe I took all the loans and stuck them in a bank account somewhere.
Yeah.
And I just ran this train into the ground. You're now going to have to go after me to find out, and that's really difficult because there's no obvious lie.
Right. So WeWork is like, oh, I tried.
Yeah, WeWork was just sort of like a really bad idea backed by a Japanese bank that should have known better.
Right.
And to get the guy who was a megalomaniac out of the way, they paid him $1 billion. Right. So he got rewarded for basically running a company into the ground. Right. That's slightly different from what we're talking about here.
Right. Okay.
And with finance, it's much more opaque. Even normal finance, not just you don't even need all the layers of crypto babble.
Right.
It's just much more opaque and hard to find out.
Right. Okay. Because I see gendered things too. And like the Adam Newman even actually gets more money and people are like, the next thing we want to do, like we're on board for that. But I get your point that there's an actual thing to point with her. And like, no, that
makes a difference.
Yeah.
So that was FTX. Where do we want to go next? Are we still raising interest rates? I don't think so. I think it's pretty much done. It's baked on at this point.
Oh.
We went through this before. Short answer. If you keep doing this, all the money in the rest of the world is going to run to the United States and you'll have the mother of all currency crises. They don't want that to happen. It looks like one of the perverse effects of China locking everything down is they're not using much gas.
Oh, okay.
Which means that all the LNG cargoes that are going to Asia are now able to go to Europe. Europe's gas storage for Germany is now above where it normally is in the winter, despite the Germans. Oil prices have fallen or continue to fall. So if it is the case that most of this is supply side driven and there isn't a kind of unhinging of expectations that was spoken about before, then it's not going to be like return to zero inflation. There's still lots of things that could go wrong. Again, more China lockdowns mean more supply chain problems, whatever. Yeah. But the rationale for continuing to hike up and up and up, that's getting weaker.
Yeah.
And there's also an awareness now, even at the IMF, I think it was the IMF did a piece that said the problem is if everybody tightens, there's a kind of fallacy of composition problem. So while it makes sense for any one country to tighten, particularly if somebody else tightens, if they all tighten at once, the sum of tightening is more than any one of them would have wanted done. Yeah. Right? So, in a sense, you can bind it too much. Okay. So, so I think it's like we're pushing back on the gas pedal a little bit.
Well, I mean, I guess that will make maybe the holidays somewhat less bleak. Yes. In terms of spending, consumer spending then.
One would certainly hope so.
Yeah.
In fact, apparently, I haven't really looked into the numbers for this yet because they just come out today. But, the Black Friday numbers. Yeah. And what's it? It's not called Crypto Monday. What is it?
Cyber Monday.
Cyber Monday. Like,
Crypto Monday.
Awesome. First of all, Black Friday is a song by Steely Dan. I know I'm dating myself here, but it has nothing to do with selling after Thanksgiving. Yeah. I don't know why. What should that be called? Should it be called sort of like the turkey sell-off?
Yeah, I have no idea. And also because it's now like a month before. I mean, it starts out like Halloween.
It's exactly. Yeah. And then sort of Cyber Monday. What? It's ridiculous. But I
like Crypto Monday now.
We should have Crypto Monday, which is basically all the stuff that you bought on Black Friday, you get to swap for crypto on Monday. Yeah. Because you were like, what was I thinking buying all that crap?
Yeah.
That's true.
Do you, just to back to crypto for a second, because I saw something, there's another crypto that has folded, but of course now I can't remember the name of it. Yeah,
I can't forget, there's Binance is one of the exchanges. That one's still okay. Yeah. Then there's another one that's basically in bankruptcy. Well, and again, this is the same as the financial crisis of 2008, right? What have AIG and Goldman Sachs and Chase Manhattan and, the firms that went down like Countrywide Mortgage all gone common. They're all connected to each other.
Yeah.
So if one of them's wildly levered, the problem, and that hits them, it's going to hit the other one because they're the counterparty. They're probably just as wildly levered. They're going to go down as well.
Right. Okay, so it's not, I get your point, the connection versus like it's some like bigger trend that like crypto's dead or something like that.
Yeah, it's classic banking. They're just massively over levered and undercapitalized, and they blew themselves up.
I just think your point that like it's such an old story. I mean,
it's such an old story.
Written it.
I mean, you read this stuff and it's like, no, don't worry, because with the hash protocol of blah blah blah, and it's all this programmer language. At the end of the day, it's like you basically borrowed short, levered, and you lost the money.
Yeah,
that's it. There's nothing. There's nothing more complex than that.
Yeah.
What's some fun stuff? Because we're going into the holidays now. We need some fun stuff.
I know, right? So, Kate and William are coming to Boston.
Shut up!
Are we going to get an invitation for this?
I did not know that. I better get an invitation.
I know.
I'm going to be seriously pissed.
I just saw this morning. First stop, they're going to Harvard, and then maybe they'll get some clam chowder in the South End or in Back Bay, maybe.
First of all, if I'm going to come all the way to Boston, why am I going to Cambridge? Second one, right? Secondly, neither of them were known for their academic prowess.
Yes.
So, first stop Harvard, it's a bit weird, isn't it? I mean, like, what are they doing? Is this sort of like Harvard kissing some royal booty or something?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's because it's a short flight. I'm not, and it's like,
I know, but you could take in a ball game. You could do a lot of other fun things in Boston. You could take the harbor cruises.
There's a lot the duck tour.
You could go to Drink, excellent bar, really, really good. I mean, there's loads of things you could do.
And they haven't been in the U.S. in 8 years, so
oh my God, it's the first thing is to go to Harvard. Jesus. Yeah. It just goes to show you that the upper classes of every country are all the same. They all want to go to Harvard.
They all want to go to Harvard.
Exactly. What else is going on?
I don't know if you saw this, but Taylor Swift had 50-something concerts at big arenas that she was selling. Of course, everything was through Ticketmaster. They were doing, I hope I'm getting all these details right. They're doing like a pre-sale, except the pre-sale went bad, and so everything got flooded. Ticketmaster, of course, couldn't crash, right? Like 1 billion people couldn't get their tickets, but some did. And so what was an interesting fallout from this was that Taylor Swift then called for, an investigation into this. And, a lot of the sort of snide comments were, is Taylor Swift doing the job of the DOJ in terms of breaking up a monopoly?
And yes, she is.
Yes.
God bless her. Right?
Yes.
Because exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just the sort of licensed monopoly. I mean, I just hate Ticketmaster.
I know.
I mean, every time you want to go get a ticket, it's like, the ticket costs $36, but you're going to end up paying $60.
Yes.
It's like, come on, what is this? This is absurd.
All the fees and all the,
no, it's
all
complete.
that sort of stuff.
And, the fees. I mean, think about, the terrible fees because of all the services they're doing. I get a monopoly right to issue a digital token that has a marginal cost of $0 to produce.
Yeah.
So I get... I do nothing except act as an exchange, and I get to double the price.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely outrageous.
Yeah.
So God bless Taylor Swift. So we've got William and Kate going to Harvard.
Yep.
Have fun, kids. We've got Taylor Swift doing the job at the Department of Justice.
Yep.
Anything else?
On the royals for a second, Meghan and Harry's docuseries, coming out a month ahead of
the book,
the tell-all book. Yes, which obviously we'll do a book club about that.
Oh, that's gonna be awesome.
But I think that was all the royal news. I think we'll be able to get in an end of the year episode, and we can talk about our favorite end of year stuff. We should go back and yes,
look
of course.
Look, what we should do is go back. I mean, not that we have time to do this, but we should go back and listen to all the episodes, and then just know all the times we were wrong.
Yeah, that's true.
Right, definitely do an error count because nobody ever does that.
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome.
So if anybody who's out there wants to do this for us, go back, listen to all the episodes, and just everything we got wrong, just write down one line. You said this, you got this wrong, right? And send it to me or Carrie,
that would be great.
Right?
Yes,
and
please.
Then we'll totally ignore you.
Yeah.
No, then we'll actually use that as the basis for an episode. That'd be great.
Since we started the World Cup, let's end with that. Do you have any favorite highlights, lowlights, etc.?
To a certain extent, 2 days ago, my riff on this was that this is the decline of the West.
Oh, okay.
Right, because it was just, anything interesting was happening with, like Germany was crap, England was crap, all the usual sort of suspects, right? And Brazil was awesome, right?
Yeah.
Really awesome. Argentina was crap, and then there was one game which came along, which was Serbia versus Ghana, I think it was. It was 3-3.
Yeah.
And it was everything that football should be.
Yeah.
It was just a brilliant game.
Yeah.
Utterly chaotic, end to end, everybody giving everything, and just like nail biting. The other one I thought I was so sad was the interesting. They don't call them South Korea; they call them the Republic of Korea.
Yeah,
in all the commentary, was the Korean game when they went down 3-2 because they were weak in the first half, but the second half they just tried so hard. They had so many chances, and you could just know it just wasn't going to happen for them. And in a sense, that's football at its best.
Yeah.
Whereas watching USA versus England was the equivalent of shooting yourself in the head with an ice pick fired from a rubber band repeatedly until your eyes fell out.
I have to say, again, I already set this up that I don't watch a lot of soccer, is that this is the one event, not even the Olympics, where I walked into class and they had arrived early and had it on the big screen, and it's live TV, which no one watches anymore.
Right.
We didn't know the outcome yet. Everybody was watching the same thing. And that's just cool because it happens very rarely.
Because you're absolutely right, because what we've done is we've individuated the screen.
Yeah.
And everybody's watching a different thing at a different time, and there's no sort of like community or sense of that. And this is exactly what this creates, right? Let's not romanticize it. Let's go back to where we started, right? It's sports washing authoritarian regimes, at least in this instance.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be, right? But it is based upon something exactly as you say, which is both communal and shared and unknown.
Yeah.
There's excitement.
Yes.
Unless it's the USA versus England.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having us in your basement.
That's always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. We will talk to you again soon.